It's already a good practice to start with exercises. How many of you are using Azure? Hands up. Okay, nice. How many of you are using AWS? Okay, nice. And how many of you are using Google Cloud? Okay, that's called data visualization. Okay, so what I'm probably as engineers, you often experience the feeling that you look at your work, what you have done, and say that, have I known that earlier? I have done it differently, and this is kind of like a thing here. What I'm trying to center my talk about is that there are these different cloud platforms are all very great. They provide lots of great functionality. They help you to scale things up and down flexibly, but at the same time, with the great flexibility in developing functionality and scaling things up and down, comes also the great flexibility to screw things up security-wise. So and there are, but at the same time also they provide great tools to put you in a right place security-wise, and it comes down to the awareness question. So it's kind of like good to be aware of certain things from the beginning before you go into production with something. Yeah, and I'm currently using Google Cloud as an example for that, but the similar pattern actually applies in the other places as well. These are some kind of like cherry-picked things that are easy to do right in the beginning, but might be tricky or complicated to fix later if you go too far with your things. Let's start from the first thing that might look very trivial at the first sight, and I even hesitated whether I will put it here at all or not. But as I'm still occasionally seeing some people doing it not in a way it is supposed, then I decided that okay, let's cover it here. It is very easy to start playing with your personal kind of like Google Cloud account from basically your personal Gmail account. Start playing with the Google Cloud platform. You do experimentations, deploy things into projects and so on, and in a very startup-ish way, it might happen in your own startup as well that at some point you discover that you are running a production system in your personal Gmail account controlled GCP shared accesses with some other personal accounts who are administering things, and then here you go. But this is actually, and occasionally I'm seeing this happen, but this is not the way it is actually supposed to be used. It is good to do kind of like experimentation and proof of concept stuff, but before going into production, you definitely want to figure out the organization subscription for yourself. You get a organization structure either from Google Workspace or Cloud Identity-free subscriptions. Miguel earlier described how things are organized in AWS. If you draw some parallels here, then this is, oops, there is a package of the stage. This is basically your top level organization where you can apply your organizational level policies and stuff like that. In Google, you have the folders here. In AWS, well, they are not exact parallels, but it is as close as it gets in AWS. These are basically the organizational units, not to be confused with organizational units in Google Workspace. These are different things. And basically those projects are what are parallel, could be paralleled in AWS with those resource accounts. All the resources that you use in Google are running under the projects, and this kind of structure allows you to kind of like properly control the policies and stuff in the cloud. You wouldn't have anything above that from your personal GCP accounts. Okay, so let's move on. You definitely want to figure out proper access management. Again, it's easy to start by playing around with just going in with your company's domain accounts, couple of, like small startup, 3-4 people. Let's go and play with something. Let's deploy something and so on. But and with small teams, it might work out nicely. But the more your team grows, the messier it might become. It is good to kind of like figure things out. Who actually needs to be able to do what? Start using groups. Groups come from Google Workspace accounts. Define those based on who needs to access where. Divide people between groups, and apply this kind of like least privilege based principles in giving access permissions. And another thing, before you go into production, harden your superadmin accounts or any dedicated accounts that are operating the production deployments. For example, ensure at least some redundancy there, so that you are not just the only superadmin who can access things, and when you somehow lock yourself out, then you are in a big trouble. But don't overpopulate it, because this might bring in some other risks. Maybe 3 or 4 are optimal. Another good practice is to separate your daily work accounts and production operating accounts from each other. Don't use your kind of like superadmin account for your daily stuff like reading emails and chatting in some having meet calls and so on. This way you are basically exposing your superadmin account to everything that happens in your laptop computer and browser. It's kind of like good to keep them separate. You can have additional kind of like identity accounts for free when you use the cloud identity free licenses. Give them enough permission to do the maintenance stuff, but nothing else. And only log into those when you need to really do some very specific production maintenance things. And you can also learn and figure, while these kind of like accounts are provided, the IAM user accounts are provided by Google Workspace, you can actually do some other kind of like security policy configurations through those workspace control panels. So it makes sense to go and learn what is available there, be aware of the possibilities, and then use them. For example, you could create a separate organizational unit for your superadmin accounts. Again, not to confuse with organizational unit in AWS, it's a different thing. And apply some more restricted security policies for those, like maybe allow them use only security keys for physical security keys for a second factor as an authentication. Maybe reduce the logged in session times. Maybe disable password only authentication for from known devices, and so on and so on. There are different things that you can play there. Another thing, location of resources. In Europe, we have this GDPR, maybe you have heard about that. But there might be also other regulations or rules that you might be exposed to that forces you to be aware of where you deploy your things. The thing is that in Google Cloud, the default approach is that when you deploy something, it tends to deploy things into US regions. When you can obviously specify explicitly where you want to deploy things, but as this default versus explicit specification is always a kind of like a tricky thing. It is error prone, it is risky. At some point in time, you might forget what you had to do. And time passes, a couple of weeks later, a couple of months later, somebody discovers, oh wow, why do we have PII deployed into US? How that happened? And then you are in trouble. First, technically, you have to fix it somehow, and also, if you also legally, if you are about to handle your PII incidents properly in the light of GDPR, you have to register your incident report somehow and handle it. There is a way to avoid it happen. You can apply policy. You can start using specific policies, and one helpful policy here is the resource location restriction that you can apply, for example, on the organizational level. Remember that picture that we had there. It is very trivial to set right from the beginning, but it can become a nightmare to fix it later, because when you have things already deployed accidentally in not appropriate locations, then fixing deployed production systems this way is kind of a hassle. If you find yourself in such kind of situation, then maybe one approach could be that you create a separate dedicated empty folder temporarily, where you apply that policy first and then start kind of moving your projects one by one in there. At every move, you see if something breaks down or not. If breaks, you can move it back, do some fixes, try to move again. If it works, it's nice. If it still breaks, try to fix again, and so on. And when you get kind of like all your projects moved into that separate temporary dedicated folder, then you're basically almost done. Then you can apply the same policy on the organization level and eliminate that folder from the between, and then you are done. But it's quite a hassle. It would be quite a hassle to do it this way. It's much easier to do it right from the beginning. Service accounts. When you start playing with Google, it's really easy to start playing with Google Cloud in a way that you just do stuff. Don't have to worry too much. And whatever applications you are deploying there, they also get attached to certain default service accounts. These are needed because this is the GCP way to provide your stuff to be able to access other resources. It's kind of like resource-to-resource authorization tool there. Now, they are good for initial experimentation and playing around, but they use somewhat older thing called access scopes based access model, which gives you a bit too broad granularity options to choose what you can do with it, and also the initial default accesses that it provides are maybe too high. Like, for example, if you deploy a VM with default setup, this VM would have like edit access to certain things which is maybe something that you don't want in your production environment. The best practice recommended by Google itself as well is that for production systems, figure out custom service accounts. They are using the role-based access model, which provides better granularity. At the same time, when you start using custom service accounts, you can also enforce another policy, which is called disable automatic IAM grants for default service accounts. This eliminates the problem that these default service accounts that are created will have automatically too much access anywhere. And in the end, also you can disable those default service accounts. You have to do it carefully in the sense that when you disable a default service account, then pay attention whether you have not broken anything. If yes, you can reactivate it, fix your situation, and deactivate it again. But don't delete default service accounts. They have somewhat special status under the hood in how Google Cloud operates, so they need to be there. If you delete them, it might break things. But you can enforce this policy and you can disable them. And work with your custom service accounts that where you apply the least privilege principles of access. Again, it is actually might sound slightly complicated in talking, but it's actually pretty simple to set up in the beginning. Might go complicated to fix it later. Similar things with networks. Whenever you create a project under your organization, with default settings, then the default network also gets created. And this default network comes with subnets for every region, plus related routes. It helps you get started quickly, get to know the platform, experiment, get things working, and so on. But for production environment, it creates a bunch of unnecessary artifacts. If you need to run your stuff only in one region, then you actually don't need all those other subnets and so on. Or maybe you can, if you get more advanced, you maybe want to do a bit different network setup at all in your projects. Another thing is that if you apply some kind of like network or security command center or some other tools that display, analyze your setups and then display the security situations, then they also tend to show this as problematic. This can be a bit maybe more complicated to work out manually, but as we have repetitively already heard today, in production, you anyways want to do as much automatically as possible. This also helps with other matters as well. There is also a separate kind of like policy that you can apply when you deploy production projects, which disables the creation of those default networks at all. And then when you deploy your production systems with infrastructure as a code tools like Terraform or others, then you can specify there how those networks would be created or configured. So I promised you to show the 5 things, but as a good musical concert as usual, I have some extra songs for you. set up your billing properly from the beginning. Because your billing account is going to pay for those projects. Usually you start off with some kind of like credit card that you have access to, and it's good enough for experimenting. But in production systems, there are some considerations. What if costs rise? What if credit card limit runs out? It could happen because you are using the same credit card for different services, not just only the cloud. There are some things that you can do. You should consider doing. For a production system, have a dedicated credit card, check the limits, have sufficient of them. Have some sort of a backup payment method. If for some reason the credit card gets blocked or whatever, the payment starts to fail, then you know how to quickly recover with some backup. And you can also engage with some local Google Cloud reseller like Moongasgate, who can issue you regular invoices on a monthly basis, so you don't have the kind of like credit card situations at all. Know your costs, set up some kind of like budgets, alerts. Things can happen unexpectedly. You really want to avoid kind of like end of month surprises. You want to know on a daily, you want to be able to know on a daily basis what is going on with your costs. And there are tools for that, pretty easy to set up, just check them out. There is also a thing called quotas in GCP. When you first start using the platform, then initially you have some sort of a quite low quotas for how much of resources, different resources you can use. These are not something that you can't increase. They are there by default for your protection. And whenever you legitimately run out of some quota, then you can easily ask for more. You basically submit a quota increase request to the cloud, and those get approved pretty quickly. But at the same time, they protect you against some kind of like unexpected or unintended cost rises that might happen. Which means that when you ask for quota increases, don't ask them too aggressively. Initially, you might have like, I don't know, a certain amount of VMs that you can deploy in some region. And then you say, we definitely need to deploy more. Let's just ask for like 100 times more. But are you really needing that much of them? You can always ask them later, gradually, if the business grows. Configure labels. These billing dashboard reporting tool provides you with the typical kind of like project breakdown, cost breakdown, some service-based cost breakdown, some SKU-based service cost breakdown. But maybe you want to have some kind of like your own logical business-derived cost breakdowns. This is where those labels become helpful. Though when you tag your stuff with well laid out labels, then it is then those same reporting tools can help you to see those costs according to those labels. And the thing is that if you really want to have that information later, you better do it already early, because attaching labels to those services is not recovering the data from the past. Those labels get applied only for the new resource usages that start from the moment you apply those labels. And if you want to have even more advanced or deeper kind of like data analysis on your costs, then another thing that you want that is very trivial to turn on right in the beginning, but won't cover your data from the past if you do it later, is to turn on, even if you don't know whether you need it or not, I still recommend turning it on. Turn on the cost export, the billing export into BigQuery datasets. This will allow you later to do any sorts of custom SQL queries and data analytics that you might want to have. I have some more songs. Just briefly about AWS, not going into that detail anymore, but to just show that the pattern is actually similar in other environments as well. Miguel gave a great speech before about how the AWS account structure works. Just know your account structure. In the beginning, it is easy to start with just one kind of like resource container account and forget that there is actually more to that. So before you go into production, figure that out, set up your structures properly, and then go from there. Access management, basically same thing. Set up your access from the organization level with IAM, identity center, use groups, define who can do what, and so on. Similar story there. There are these service control policies that you can apply for, let's say, to disable wrong region deployments and things like that. Just figure them out and then apply them according to your actual needs. Again, repetitively been here today, use infrastructure as a code tools and billing. Similar story, know your costs on a daily basis, ensure the safety of your payment methods, have a relationship with local reseller, use labels, and paralleled with the Google Cloud BigQuery in AWS, turn on your cost usage reports for custom analysis, because the same applies. It's easy to turn them on in the beginning. When you do it later, you won't recover the history. And that's pretty much it from my side. These stuff, those kind of like tunings that I'm talking about, most of them, they are either free or at fairly low additional cost. For example, this BigQuery data set that starts growing when you have this billing export happening, it might add some marginal cost to your things, but it's fairly low. And if you don't need, you can delete historical data as well. They are mostly vendor recommended practices, so it's not kind of like too much invention here. If you look up the best practice documentation, then you can see the similar things. And there are also more kind of like third-party sources that have also done some benchmarking and then give you some kind of like best practice recommendations. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you for the talk. So basically with this structure you mentioned with example com as the root, what will happen, for example, if company will change this example com to whatever like else.com? Is it possible to migrate like to a new domain?
Let's see. It's basically a billing account there. And you can create a new billing account, and it's just a matter of a couple of mouse clicks to move everything over. That's it. It's really, really easy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What happens when you get acquired or you acquire some other company with already existing Google? account structure? How easy is to add another one?
It's basically the same question that was asked before. You basically then have a situation where you have different billing accounts, and you can move things around if you need to, like consolidate into same things under the same billing or same policies. But obviously this policy thing actually needs to be considered. So in that regards, I said before that it might be a matter of couple of kind of like mouse pointing clicks, but actually if there are some kind of like policies applied that restrict certain things, then in that regard, so obviously you need to be careful and test things maybe first, but other than that, it's just moving things around.
Okay, more questions?
So what's the worst thing that if you don't configure it right from the get-go, that would come and bite you from the behind?
Well, yeah, we could basically have a walk through all the points, like what could possibly go wrong when you don't do that. Well, if you are not setting up your organization properly, then it grows mess. You don't know who accesses what, and then this might bite you in the back at some point where you have some unauthorized things or uncontrolled things happening, and then you won't be able to figure out who and why did something or what happened exactly, and so on. The GDPR example I brought, you might end up with some legal issues if you end up with PII outside of EU and won't properly handle it. Well, these kind of like default service accounts and default network accounts, these are just kind of like security perimeter questions. It just has a higher probability that maybe some attacker or some malicious entity might be able to use some of it for some lateral movements or stuff like that. So that might end up badly for you. It's kind of like a probability question there again. So it's a question of good practices that have come out from things happened somewhere in the past.
So in this case, let's have a round of applause for Asko, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.